Kim and I have returned to discuss the critical importance of recruitment stages and everything in related to the traditional recruitment process, really, beyond the more strategic stuff that we began to discuss in the intro piece. Reasonable adjustments, changes to working patterns and job structures, and existing support for a wide variety of organisations and contexts. So thanks again for joining me, Kim, and I think this should be an interesting one in terms of both of our experiences.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, and we are back on record. Okay, so I think we will start off with a question for you, but I'm sure we can, both discuss this sort of thing.
Yeah.
In terms of, can you give an example of how employers might merge the needs and aspirations of candidates with their own business needs and opportunities, and how might a positive and cohesive organizational culture, and obviously the wavelength approach, which I'd encourage anybody to look at episode 1, how would these solutions, approaches, and ideas help?
That's a really, really good question. So, and it's ultimately at the core of certainly what we see as people getting the right people into their team, because it's really important that it's a two-way street. So people are looking for a place to call their home, and they want to buy into the direction and vision of that company. And it's certainly, if you can communicate to people where you're going, what you're trying to do, and the values that you hold dear to as a part of your unique team, then you will attract the right people to your team. They will want to stay with you longer, and they will deliver much more for you because they're ultimately bought into where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. And if they feel like a valued part of that team, then that's absolutely going to make a huge difference. So I suppose the question is, how do you do that? And the question and how you answer that is in the previous episode, I talked about 4 key characteristics that people really want to be looking for. So the first one is cultural and value fit. And what we mean by that is, what are your values for your team? So if you understand what they are, and in a clear, concise way, that in an authentic way that everyone buys into, what are we about as a business, and what are the rules that guide us? That's the first step, to understand what those are. And then the second step is, what for this particular role is, what are the values important for this particular role? And then ultimately, your culture is a product of your values, because everyone's walking around. If you've got a good value fit for everyone in your team, then you can have different people from different backgrounds, different experience, because everyone's pushing in the same direction and respects that everyone is different. And that is absolutely the key to a high functioning and high performing team, is understanding that everyone in that team has a different role to play, has different strengths that they bring to the table, and has an opinion coming from and has a great opinion coming from their own unique background and experience. So what we would absolutely encourage you to do, something we encourage our partners to do, and we work with them to do, is to understand what are their values, what are they about, what for their business, where they're going, as what is their culture and their environment, and then setting questions around those values. So our values might be, we like to, we're really focused on getting it right, or high quality, or customer service, or customer experience, that type of thing. Is setting questions around that someone can ask you. And the benefit of doing that is that everyone who, if you can communicate your values in a clear way, that will attract the right people, because they will be able to relate to those values. And then when you ask them the question around those things, and you can compare one application on the other in a completely unbiased way. And that's the second really important part of really what our approach is that everyone involved in the recruitment process should buy into the criteria that you set, because once you set the criteria, whether it be around, as I said, around value fit. I mean, obviously there's important questions that you can ask around adaptability. So how would you react in a certain situation? What motivates you? So you question around their motivation, their ability to do the job, their value fit, and then ultimately, can they fit in your particular working environment? Is everyone needs to buy into those and in an unbiased way, because what will happen is, if you do that in the right way and you set a structure up that everyone is grading the right way, and so we do that, we would encourage our partners to set the questions and then have essentially a grade. So does someone, when you ask this question, when they answer it, do they meet that the thing we're looking for, the criteria we're looking for, or do they not meet the criteria we're looking for, or do they exceed what we were looking for? And then ultimately, in a really unbiased way, add those up at the end and go, in my opinion, as I'm this particular interviewer, I think my score is this. And then you might have a different score, and then I have a weighted average of scores. And what that does is it removes the unconscious bias of, do I like this person? Is this person like me? And that's where a lot of people fall over. Is they forget why they're hiring them, and that they're bringing them into part of a diverse team of different people, and will focus on, are they like me and I like them, and then that's where things go wrong. But if you get that right, then you actually have a team of highly motivated people, and a really, to go back to your question, really cohesive, positive environment, because everyone's pushing the same direction and they feel valued.
Yeah, I completely agree. One point I would make about unconscious bias and unconscious bias training, which is a pet hate of mine, is that statistically, I don't know whether you found this, Kim, yourself, that traditional unconscious bias training doesn't really work. We all have, it's much better to think of it as we all have certain biases and considerations as to what we naturally do and don't like. What you've got to do is understand those and take action to make sure that they don't, come into your decision making to the detriment of any particular candidate.
Yeah, I think this is about setting.
That's a much better way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think this is about setting if you've got a positive environment where you understand that everyone's different and they bring different things to the table, then you can let go of some of those. Try and let go of some of those unconscious biases. Is that something that you would say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, valuing individual and also collective differences, but particularly individual differences, I think is absolutely key and a cornerstone of what we would advocate. And this is why, as I said towards the end of episode 1, it's very difficult to work with clients straight off, and just where they just come. Some have come to me and said, "Give me a straightforward solution," and there is nothing straightforward about this. What you've got to do is understand your culture and your cohesive fit and the organizational context before, as it is now from day 0, before you get into even a day 1 scenario, so that you can actually implement the required steps, probably gradually, to make sure that they're embedded going forward, either at the end of whatever program we are suggesting that they implement.
Yeah, no, I think a probably good example again that we use is people. Certainly we've in this past, people struggle to understand or comprehend what values and culture are. So what are they? And there's some interesting. There's a website where you can go. It's called Barrett's Value Assessment. Even though it's not an assessment, it's just you can pick some words, and that means something to you. If you and I picked words without any definition, so beside them, we would attach a very different meaning to those words. So certainly when in our experience with values, it's very important that you put a definition of what you mean by that word, so that and that everyone in the team that you're in goes, yes, we agree with that. And Seth Godin, who's the marketing advertising guru, has a really good analogy for certainly for values, which is people like us do what we do. And I think it's a really succinct way of explaining what values are, which is that values are the rules that you play by, the guide, the creed that you live by, essentially. And people like us do what we do. And if you can communicate that effectively, then everyone in the team will understand that this is what we do as a team. And also people outside your organization will be attracted to that from an employee point of view, a customer point of view, an advocate point of view. And then the second one is, what is culture? Again, culture is a question that is talked about. So culture is a thing that's talked about a lot. But again, it's something that's difficult to put into words. And there's a famous business specialist or professor was a Drucker, and one of his is it's the way we do things around here was his analogy of culture. And essentially what culture is an amalgamation of your values. And once you have that set in place, and certainly what we see is once you can understand what your values are, people like us do what we do, and this is the way we do things around here, and then you can start setting that as questions in terms of if I take from a recruitment perspective, then that massively opens up to a much broader horizon, and you end up with a better motivated, happier team.
Yeah, completely agree, and great analogy. And what I'd also like to say, just from my perspective, before I think you asked me a little bit about my experiences, is when you're looking at more of a traditional, let's say a conventional interview, or a more traditional process, which I think will still come under the remit of Wavelength, because you've still got to recruit people into an organization. Certainly from the interview stage, any sort of reasonable adjustments, which obviously is a requirement under the Equality Act 2010. I don't like to spout legislation verbatim, but I think this is quite important. Should really be discussed, and you should really be having an open conversation directly at that interview stage, as soon as you possibly can, or even better would be at the beginning of onboarding, which starts even pre-recruitment or pre-interview. So I think that's absolutely key. Also thinking about job design, so home and remote working, availability of technology, even the use of internal or external agents, such as access to work to be able to get equipment. I'm talking to you basically from a laptop that is on an easy riser stand, a Bluetooth keyboard, and a full-blown Plantronics headset that links into both my computer and my mobile phone, and even onto an internet-powered work phone if I was using one. Mm-hmm. It works perfectly. I also regularly use, and I will mention the name, Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a voice recognition software that is very well known. Many of you will probably know it and may even have it on your systems. And basically that's 4 times faster than general typing. And just by using these technologies that were not necessarily designed for or intended for general use, but were more specialist in terms of diversity and inclusivity for everybody. If you can get those, used in terms of the culture, actually is thinking, well, how can we break down the barriers and use the tools that are available to us, then all the better. And a lot of organizations and people are unaware of what access to work can do. I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect. There are some glitches, and that would be, I would encourage anybody that's interested in this sort of area to have a further discussion with me or another specialist in future, because it's way beyond the scope of this and even the length of this discussion. But try to understand what's available, and then how are you actually going to be able to integrate that, rather than just seeing diversity as a silo or as something that we've got to purely legally comply with. Because as I've tried to articulate there are some legal requirements in terms of reasonable adjustments and protected characteristics and et cetera, which is all well known. But actually, how you break down those barriers and put this into practice is very important, and can actually, by thinking about it in a strategic way that isn't siloed but fully integrated into your business, valuing individual differences and all of the wonderful inclusion and talent and the wavelength location models that we have both discussed, both now and previously. In terms of thinking in a cohesive way, I think will also reduce your legal and litigation risks as well. Because what every business needs to do at this time is save money and increase their innovation and productivity. And what a great way to do it.
Yeah, I think it's really right. And by following that approach, so you talk about, I mean, the technology is amazing. I mean, 10 years ago, we couldn't operate the business that we're operating now. I mean, our team is spread across. I mean, I'm sitting here in my spare bedroom. Our team is spread across the UK. Some of our team are in other countries, and we're a relatively small business. So it's amazing. This is I think that's been the good thing about with COVID, is that is open people up to remote working. And that they can get a better result from people when people have a better work-life balance, for example. So they're not having to commute or to go into an office. And it also opens up your the market in terms of the types of people that you can employ, because you can employ a much broader range of people, which can only be a good thing. It's certainly something that we would highly encourage, and that's where a values-based approach comes into its own. Really, is because you're getting people that you would never have considered before, and who will actually turn out to be brilliant. We've got numerous stories of that happening. I'm happy to speak to anyone about if they want to get some real life examples of that. There's numerous examples of people who've come in that they never would have even looked at before, have come in and performed absolutely brilliantly in the position, and are now running the team that they came in to start off in the first place. It's incredible.
Absolutely, and what I would say is, obviously, my business, Talman HR, as I began to talk about in the introductory episode, was set up in 2018 as a direct response to struggling to find work in conventional roles because of primarily of managing my disability, which, while it is stable, and the situation and the circumstances don't really change. I will basically experience no major change, certainly for a long period of time, and probably for the rest of my life, which is a good thing. But there are one or two incremental, and there can be some occasional severe changes in the way in which I feel and have to manage things on a day-to-day basis, which can affect things like productivity and performance. And what I have to do then is to mitigate against those and work extra hard on the good days versus the bad days. If I was in a conventional employment context, particularly pre-COVID, it's very difficult to be able to do that on a non-remote basis. So I really do hope, as I say, that COVID has acted as a catalyst to enable people to become employed, access work in different ways, and think about the broader flexible working and model of the flexible firm, which is something that is one of my pet loves. That basically, what that model basically does is looks into all of the internal and external pools of talent in relation to a lot of the what we would call employment status types in the UK, and actually integrates the two. And once you begin to look at that, obviously with IR35 being a potential consideration from April 2021, once you begin to look at that more broadly, you begin to see how the diverse talent and that 70% rule that I talked about earlier actually fits and broadens out that talent pool on the wider horizons of the business.
Yeah, I mean, do you see employers considering that more? Because certainly we are with when we start following the approach that we follow with our partners, is that it does open them up. But they're certainly considering it a lot more. I mean, is that something that you see?
They're certainly more open to it. They're considering it. I haven't seen a wonderful amount of progress at the moment because everything's uncertain with the business environment in a lot of cases. Still, I think there is some progress that's going on, and I certainly hope that progress continues. What I would say is that I'm now being considered for various opportunities because of my experience and the way in which I work, which is now being considered as a competitive advantage. Whereas previously, if I'd have gone for those sorts of roles and opportunities, and believe me, I used to do so, particularly when I first started out, where the way in which I majorly have to work, or admittedly I'm ultra flexible, but people didn't see it like that, was actually an inhibitor to me being successful in securing various contracts and career opportunities. So I certainly hope that I believe that the trajectory is improving, and we just need to see what the economic outlook for the rest of the UK and probably the wider world is like to go alongside this before we can make hopefully what I would consider to be a major progress, which is most welcome.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I think you're right. I think it's there's still a long way to go. But I do think the good thing about this is, as I said, like you said earlier as well, it's pushed things forward. Maybe 10 years. I mean, it's like the NHS 20 years. It is good, and I think people are opening themselves up much more to. We don't all have to be sitting in the same room. We don't have to be from the same background. Don't have to be work. It's more of an outcome. Well, sometimes we work on an outcome-led approach rather than you've been sat behind a desk for 8 hours a day. It's a outdated approach way of doing things, and understand that everyone is different and everyone works to different scales. It's obvious really when you look at it, but people still aren't doing it too much.
Yeah, I certainly hope the phenomenon of presenteeism, as it's readily called, is negated. But you've also got the issue of leavism from home working. And I do think that however heavily you either have to work or like to work, you do need to make sure that there is a level of work-life balance and that you are able to shut the door. I'm lucky enough to basically live in a 2-bedroom flat, one of which I use as an office, the other as obviously my own bedroom and a living area. And I always, proverbially shut the door, even if I can't physically sometimes, after a certain time, because in the evening, because you do need that separation in order to avoid the risk of burnout or heightened other health-related issues.
You know, that's a really good point. As I'm similar in the same place, I'm lucky enough to have the little office as a master bedroom here, and then a lot of people don't. I mean, that's really an interesting question, I suppose, how employers react to people who don't have access to that stuff. Is that to a space where they can work, or I suppose that then there's the mental health considerations of people being at home a lot. Our business, certainly our business, we've been operating remotely for about 2 years, so I'm very used to sitting on Zoom or whatever we use Teams to have chat, and I feel like I get my interaction with my teammates through Zoom or whatever, and we do meet up in person as well, but not sitting next to each other every day. So yeah, I'm interested. What's your experience on that? Is that
I think
is that a challenge for people?
I think it's about having a balance.
Yeah.
And seeing and meeting up with people where you can, obviously legally. In the UK, I think the groups are 6 and have been since the previous Monday. But you know, so meeting up, you know, where you can and where you feel it's safe to do so, but in a work context also, and even socially beyond that. And I think this is where it mixes quite well. The advent of Zoom and the wider use of Zoom or other video conferencing technologies, which I've used for quite some time now to basically do probably 90% of my work remotely, is great because it does reduce the level of, you know, social isolation, feelings of potential loneliness, etc., that someone may be considering, and these are all important. But I think that video conferencing and technology is not a direct replacement. But considering where the situation we've got with COVID at the moment, where there isn't much of a choice, it's a good substitute. What I think will happen going forward is that, and I think I begin to mention this in episode 3, is where you've got a flexible working in terms of moving from one fixed pattern of work to another more flexible but fixed pattern of work, where you can actually decide, obviously with fairly strict protocols probably for the next 2 years, when you want to come in and out of the office, much like some, you know, large innovative American businesses operate at the moment, where it's much more measured in terms of outcomes, and you might want to come in for business meetings or team meetings or other, you know, reasons periodically, rather than actually having to be physically sat and present and risk of presenteeism when you either, you know, don't really need to be there or shouldn't be there for whatever reason, either because you've got a health issue or because, you know, you could manage your own day more effectively. But the key thing with home and remote working is being disciplined, and and that's something that I've never really struggled with, but I can imagine that is more difficult, and I've heard of examples where it is more difficult if you struggle to be more disciplined than you or as disciplined as you probably need to be.
Yeah, no, I
sorry, that's not a straight answer, but
no, that led to another question for me actually, which is certainly we're sort of saying this as well a bit. It says, do you think that companies are going to start moving away from these big offices in central locations into a more sort of spread across, geographically spread setup? Also, the use of things like this, again, what we do would hire, like I say, like a Regis office or go and meet somewhere, you know, where we can sit together or hire a room together and we come together as a team and then move away. So you move away from these sorts of right, we all turn up to the same place every day and we sit down, and which is obviously you're seeing some of the like obviously the businesses that are set up around the city, so like the coffee shops or whatever. Do you think that that's the way the world's going to go? It's going to spread, proliferate out into the towns and villages and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the way it's going to go. I think a major UK banking executive recently proclaimed that the era of the big office is dead. And to a large extent, I think that that's probably the case. You'll have smaller offices for team meetings, or for smaller firms that want to try to compete with the larger players such as Wavelength and ultimately Telman HR. Then we will have these sort of regional offices, or even what some smaller firms are doing, and I will mention them in name just in this context, is hiring out what's called the London office, when they actually need to see people in, in this case London or other major cities. I should imagine they have other schemes in other major cities for those of you that are in other major cities. Yeah, I certainly think that it'll be reduced cost of office, increased costs in terms of technology. The actual output, things are going to be measured on output, which is how they should have been in the first place, rather than process.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And also purpose, because what's the point of an output without understanding the purpose by which you're doing something? Because an output is only good if the output's been effective.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
You can spend 90% of your time wasted time and 10% being brilliant, but it's how good that 10% is and trying to maximize and making sure that you can get to 80 to 90% efficiency and effectiveness, which is much more effective than efficiency. 80 to 90% effectively, or effectiveness more readily.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's an interesting thing, which is that people massively overestimate what they can do in the short term, but then underestimate what they can do in the longer term. So this is one of the things, certainly from a recruitment perspective, is that people are what quite often what we'll see is people are recruiting because they have a problem, or they need a problem to be solved now. But if you start taking a more strategic approach to your people and your growth strategy, you'll actually find that you can control things a lot better. You'll have a much better outcome, and you will be able to remove this pressure from you to make these snap decisions quickly. So I think it's a good way. It obviously brings its challenges, but it's a positive step forward.
Okay, I think I think that obviously thinking about COVID and a COVID or more uncertain situation like we're going through at the moment, I appreciate that thinking long term and holistically and strategically can be difficult for many businesses, and I understand that, and probably I would say Kim, you're also aware of that. But I would say that what we need to do in these more difficult scenarios is to work with talent, both in the organization and the talent pool that's available externally, to work out, one, what can we do now to fix the immediate problems, which may be not where we want to go in the long term or in the medium term, but we need to actually fix this to make sure that we can survive as a business and as a career option for people. And secondly, then, how are we going to grow together to move into that more sustainable, better, even if I may say, admittedly this may sound slightly geeky, but more fun phase of the business, where you're thinking more creatively and innovatively, even if that isn't appropriate for this moment in time.
Sure. No, definitely.
So yeah, Are there any other questions that you want to?
I think I think on that, I don't know if you've kind of covered a good sort of breadth of service really, which is that it's going to, things are changing. People need to start, like I said, merging, creating a positive, cohesive cult environment. I think, and there are definitely ways that people can do that. And it isn't all doom and gloom out there. You need, if you start, I mean, it is obviously there are pressing issues now, but it is good to take a balanced view, which is to go that, well, there could be opportunities here in this, even though there's short-term issues, there could be opportunities, and a lot of the best businesses come out of times of adversity. So, so that's certainly something to think about.
Absolutely, and being agile and innovative, and thinking outside the box, and using the times of uncertainty to come up with solutions, and use it as a fresh start as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, Kim, many thanks for that, and I'm looking forward to our third episode, which will be probably the final one for now, unless we can think of any more, on Recruitment 2.0, so this new innovative approach that we're both advocating, and the future of work. And I'm sure that'll be an interesting discussion for viewers and listeners alike. So many thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Chris.